What's up, guys? Hello, so Football Talk here. We've arrived at the point of the NFL offseason where rosters are generally set, with some crazy trades being pulled off early. The first 3 or 4 phases of free agency past us now, the draft a couple of months in the rearview mirror, and out of a few largely injured veterans still out there, not a whole lot is going to change personnel-wise still. So at this point, I thought it was time to kind of reflect on the roster building process and point out that one area where each team could still be looking to upgrade. This can be a starter, key rotational piece, specialist, or just general depth being added at a certain position. And please understand that this is not meant as which player could still improve a certain team the most at this moment, because you're not going to find a superstar quarterback just like they're out there today, which would otherwise be the pick from any of these, but rather a certain area of the team that caught my eye when studying all the rosters as a spot where I thought they weren't totally settled. When I started putting together notes for this breakdown and thought about certain talking points, originally I wanted to focus on the piece or player that was still missing for each team, but I quickly switched to more of a run-through of some of the moves that were already made by each team, how it led me to writing down the mentioned position and what it would or could do for each team. At this point, I should also note that I'm recording this a good week in advance from when it's coming out, just in case the moves happened since then. I split this into NFC and AFC, which a lot of those should come out a week from now today, and I added timestamps for each division. Down below you can also find the links to my page, hellosofootballtalk.com, where I recently put out a piece on the most improved position groups this offseason, while I also added social media handles, if you want to stay up to date with all the content that I put out there. And if you have some time after this to dive even deeper into each team's roster and want to hear me break down all 262 picks from the NFL draft, one division at a time, you can find all of that here on my YouTube channel. But now let's get into the actual video, starting with the NFC North, where the first team up here, alphabetically speaking, is the Chicago Bears. Reichert was the pick for them, and really helpful second-year quarterback Justin Fields in general was what I want to see, unlike general manager Ryan Poles and the new regime in Chicago apparently, who have understandably rid themselves of some of the long-term veterans with big cap hits, but also not added any significant pieces on offense. When the wide receiver corps consists of Byron Pringle, Equinemius St. Brown, their third rounder Willis Jones Jr., along with Daniel Mooney, who's the clear diamond of this group, teams are going to happily play man coverage and watch Fields get sandwiched eventually, since he's got to hold onto the ball. However, if you want Fields to have a chance at all, you'll need to give him some time and not have him flushed out wide constantly with instant pressure up the middle, as he easily led the NFL in sack rate at 11.8%, and they need to present a real threat handing the ball off up the middle to open up chances for those big throws way down the field off heavy play action, as about 30% of Fields' throws off play action went at least 28 yards through the air. Nobody else in the league even cracked 20%. So you've got to be able to suck in the defense and give your quarterback room to step up into the throw so he can really rip it. You've got Cody Whitehair and Sam Mustipher there, but that third spot on the interior will likely be decided between Patrick Lucas, Dakota Dozier, and those upside rookies that they drafted, who I don't believe are ready to play this year. They'd rather play Larry Borom inside. Left tackle becomes the spot instead, so the whole unit is in a bit of flux right now, as is this offense in general, and not really the position that you want your second-year quarterback to be in. But now let's move on to the Detroit Lions, who actually put on upside quarterback, and I love what the Lions have done this offseason, making some cheap under-the-radar signings like wide receiver DJ Chark and safety Deshaun Elliott, before putting together one of the top draft classes out there. I love the way that the roster is built inside out, with the potential to be one of the best offensive lines in football, and a couple of impact players on the D-line with top 50 picks, in Michigan's Aiden Hutchinson and Kentucky's Joshua Pascal, and now they started adding serious speed on the outside offensively to open up things. I talked about how well they drafted in more detail in my NFC North draft and roster review, but I also mentioned that they could have taken a shot at the most important position. They somewhat surprisingly didn't target a quarterback with potential to lift and beyond anything that you can accomplish with Jared Goff on the center. The combination of Tim Ball and David Blau screams backups to you, having been nothing but emergency options for their NFL careers, while Goff is certainly the most overpaid guy at the position, I believe, with a cap hit in the $31 million range. I don't blame Brad Holmes and the Lions front office at all for deciding to build the house first and not give up major resources to get somebody else in there, but they did have multiple chances in the draft to at least bring somebody in, like a Malik Willis or a Matt Corral, and I'd definitely like to at least see somebody on the roster who just gets me excited. Hard to find a guy at this point though, unless they want to take up the drama that Baker Mayfield may bring along. He's gotten royally screwed by Cleveland, and at this point all the power is with the team looking to trade for him. But Detroit experienced firsthand that he's got his baggage as well, since it was after their win in Detroit he decided to not go to the podium. Definitely a tough guy that Dan Campbell would like, but the personal stuff may not be what he wants to bring in here. The Green Bay Packers, and I put down seam threat for them, which I'll get to in a second here. While the Packers continue to add to a highly impressive defense that they've built in recent years to support the MVP Aaron Rodgers, that pass catching group for Green Bay without Devontae Adams has major questions to answer this upcoming season. I love the talent of North Dakota State's Christian Watson as an early second rounder. They drafted Nevada's Romeo Doubs in the 4th, who can be a nice vertical threat for them. And maybe Sammy Watkins can have a resurgence, catching patches from Rodgers. I'd say all of those guys on the perimeter have to prove themselves, but they at least have guys there looking to establish themselves. What I don't really see on this roster is somebody who can do a lot of damage between the numbers, particularly what they did with Adams attacking that void between the second and third level, where he contributed some huge plays in key moments. Robert Tonyan, the tight end, can be a productive player on crossers and slip routes off the boots game, but working downfield isn't necessarily his thing. A bunch of quick game from the Packers last season, with the top 2 offensive linemen out for the majority of games, but they don't have that guy who can shake defenders out of the boots off the line anymore to get those quick wins, and need to target that area of the field that I just talked about, maybe even more so actually now. So getting somebody at tight end or a big slot who can at least present a threat there would be a move that I'd be looking to make. Randall Cobb used to be that guy who can run by safeties, but certainly not at this stage of his career in his second stint with the team. And then 4th, the Minnesota Vikings, a 4-eye or 5 technique. This was a bit more challenging because the Vikings could certainly be looking to add to a tight end room that has very little behind Irv Smith Jr., who missed all of last season, and the interior of the offensive line is a bit of question mark still, but I'm looking at the defensive side of the ball here. They haven't really made the secondary a priority in the draft, but while they've traditionally been an even front team under Mike Zimmer for such a long time, with Vic Fangio disciple at Donatello's background, where he has plenty of experience with 4-3 personnel, a lot of those modern defenses that are inspired by Fangio's split safety principles use more out fronts or base downs, and are looking for body types who can wing gaps back in the run game and not so much get up the field. That's what new head coach Kevin O'Connell is also familiar with from his days with the Rams. Making Harrison Phillips a priority signing and getting Jordan Hicks at that second level indicates that even more so to me. So with Dalvin Tomlinson, now Phillips, splitting A and B gap duties mostly, they may still be looking for the Michael Brockers or A'Shawn Robinson, who can be head up or shaded inside of the offensive tackle on the strong side and hold up the point of attack. Right now their options for that role are Armon Watts, James Lynch, and Jalen Twyman. That was going to be a battle to watch, but I'm not sure if any of those guys are real difference makers. And even if they want to live in sub packages with 2 interior defenders and edge guys on the field, you don't really have that guy who can create disruption up the B gap in more of a typical 3 technique role. Which has us moving on to the NFC East, where the first team up here is the Dallas Cowboys, and I put number 3 running back with return ability. Looking at the losses the Cowboys have suffered following a 12-win season, where they did win the NFC East by 3.5 games basically, having swept the Eagles. 2 starters on the offensive line in Connor Williams and Lyon Collins are now in the AFC. They decided to trade away Amari Cooper, and Randy Gregory pulled the rug from underneath them, where there was a dispute about a contract detail which pushed him to Denver. Looking at the draft class, however, they at least targeted all those areas of the team with 4 of the first 5 picks. Not saying that they will be able to replace them at the same level, but it's not like they left a major hole unfilled. A little creative here and kind of combined 2 roles. Currently Dallas' number 3 running back is Rico Dowdle, who touched the ball just 7 times on offense for 24 yards in 2020 and missed all of last season. At the same time he flashed with 1 long kick return that year, but was only trusted with 4 total. So with Tony Pollard's role continuing to increase, and deservedly so, since I've been asking Dallas to make him a more prominent player with the decline we've seen out of Zeke Elliott, they could also use another back who offers the type of skill sets to be there when Pollard gets banged up. Likely candidates to return punts and kicks respectively are Pollard and CeeDee Lamb, who should be an even more integral piece to this offense due to trading away Amari Cooper, which I already talked about, having those 2 vertical threats on the outside, and Lamb now really working that space in between those. So by acquiring a player similar to Pollard as an insurance policy offensively, and who can allow those stars to focus on that side of the ball, you'll be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Next up the New York Giants, and for them I put down a complete tight end. When I was looking for the Giants roster, considering they are riding with Daniel Jones for at least 1 more year, and they've now surrounded him with pieces at the wide receiver and the offensive line. There's not a whole lot missing on the offense on paper. Some of the depth lost on the interior of the defensive line is a sneaky area for them, and by deciding to move on from James Bradbury, they'll need some young guys to step up at corner. But I don't really have a guy at the tight end position who can do it all for them, particularly with Evan Ingram leaving in free agency this offseason, who was more of a big slot and had some disappointing moments in New York that we've heard fans cry about, but overall was a playmaker for them. Ricky Seals-Jones has had his moments in the past when the star in front of him has gotten hurt and he caught a few passes, but there's a reason he's on his 4th team in 5 years. Jordan Akins had a few highlight moments in Houston and 2 straight seasons above 400 yards, but he's more so an H-back and react option. The 4th round Daniel Bellinger from San Diego State can be used as a versatile blocker and is the closest thing they have to a complete player at that spot, but he really lacks any physical features that will blow you away. Not that new head coach Brian Daboll's offense is built around the high position necessarily, but they usually only have one of those guys on the field with how much 11 personnel they run, and he should be able to make an impact in both facets of the game, whether it's out in a pattern or utilized as a blocker. A player like Dawson Knox has been able to take advantage of his chances in Buffalo, providing some big plays down the field and in the red zone. The Eagles, and I put down deep half safety for them. The Eagles have had a pretty phenomenal offseason, I would say. First, they bring back stalwarts on either side of the line in Jason Kelsey and Fletcher Cox on team-friendly one-year deals. Then they trade Brown during the first day of the draft to give them a true alpha receiver and make things easier on all of the young guys. The rest of the draft class could contain some real difference makers as well. And then James Bradbury is barely released by the Giants before the division rivals snatch him up for $10 million this year. Cornerback would have otherwise been the choice here, but now the one significant loss in personnel that they did suffer in personnel was safety Rodney McLeod, who's now in the Colts. Marcus Epps did play nearly 50% of defensive snaps last season, including 3 starts, but you'd like to see him stay at that number 3 spot, who they can also drop down low as a big nickel or hole defender. And the 4th round pick from 2 years ago when K'Wan Wallace has only played 19 and 22% of the snaps respectively, as a designated slot defender as well. And there aren't any fixture veterans on this roster outside of that. The one guy I do like a lot and believe he can start in this league is Reed Blankenship, who he picked up as an undrafted free agent from Middle Tennessee State, but he will have to prove himself on teams and earn a job in general still before we talk about anything like this. So there's some uncertainty with that second safety spot alongside Anthony Harris for a team that played as many 2 high shells as any team in the league last season and can't just sit back there as much again, but rather contest throws towards the middle of the field. And of the defense, for the Washington Commanders, I put down Mike Linebacker, considering people talking about this Washington defense about to become one of the best in the NFL, and they were being drafted as one of the first one off the board in many fantasy leagues. The fact that they finished 20-15 points allowed and near the bottom in multiple key categories certainly was disappointing. Not saying that Carson Wentz will fix all of the problems on offense, but I don't see a glaring hole in that side of the ball necessarily. So in this defensive unit, the biggest issue last season was defending the middle of the field, where the inexperience at linebacker certainly was a factor. The other spot I was considering here was nickelback or nickel safety, since they played by far the best when they used Landon Collins in that role as that third safety in the field. But they did draft guys in the middle rounds these last 2 years who will make a mark on special teams and can either fill that role as a tandem or allow them to pull Cameron Curl closer to the line of scrimmage maybe. Instead, I would have liked them, when talking about free agency already, to find a partner for last year's first rounder Jamin Davis at that second level. I love Davis's athletic profile and what he can do as a space and chase player at the will spot, but they need somebody next to him who can plug running lanes and help carry routes down the seams at Mike. Cole Holcomb should not log 142 tackles for them, since many of those were well beyond the line of scrimmage, and he was pretty much a liability in coverage. David Mayo has been a career backup, and Khalid Hudson is basically a designated special team for them, so that's definitely a concern. But let's now move on to the NFC South, where first up we have the Atlanta Falcons with punter here, and it certainly doesn't appear to be the biggest need in terms of one player being able to change around the fortunes of a team. I could point at a still fairly underwhelming group of pass catchers beyond the top 2 names, some question marks about who they'll deploy in the slot defensively, and most glaring, the unit that needs guys to emerge is the defensive line, where outside of Grady Jarrett, there's a lot of guys who have flashed in college, but not established themselves as pros. With that being said, we understand that this is a rebuilding franchise, which will have issues on both sides of the football. I like some of the pieces that they have to work with for defensive coordinator Dean Pease after a very disappointing season for them. The offense is the real question mark in my opinion, having moved on from long-time veteran quarterback Matt Ryan and Calvin Ridley missing all year with a suspension. With Marcus Mariota and third-round pick Desmond Ridder competing for the starting gig on the center, both being fairly conservative and not taking as many risks, along with the lack of receiving talent outside of Kyle Pitts and 8th overall pick Drake London from USC, we may see them go 3 and out or just see a lot of the drive stall in general. To take some pressure off the defense and not constantly work with negative field positioning, they need somebody who can give opposing teams some long fields and not be detrimental when pinned deep themselves. However, right now on the roster, they have Don Maggio, who had a tough time even finding out that he's had 4 preseason punts and none in regular action, and undrafted free agent Seth Vernon from Portland State, who wasn't even in the top 20 of Dan Brugler's punter rankings, which he compiles through the opinions of special team coaches around the league. So that is definitely a spot that is a major question mark for them. And then with the Carolina Panthers, I put deep post safety. To be honest, I can understand why we haven't seen the Panthers make any big moves this offseason, whether it was in free agency or going after quarterback, because head coach Matt Rule and to some degree probably also general manager Scott Fitterer didn't have the green light to make any decisions beyond this year, since at this point that regime probably has to prove why they shouldn't be replaced in 2023 rather than being fairly evaluated for this season alone. They will have 3 new and upgraded starters on the offensive line, with a couple of free agents and 6th overall pick Ikram Kwanu. Back obviously remains the biggest area of uncertainty for them. I believe Sam Darnold could show improvement and hopefully finally being protected in an adequate fashion. And I like Mackerel a lot better than his late third round draft position would indicate, but he needs a year to learn an actual dropback offense. Defensively, they didn't re-sign Hassan Reddick, but still have a lot of pieces to create pressure, like they did early last season. My big question is how they may adjust on the back end. Snow being brought along as Rule's defensive coordinator from Baylor a couple of years ago. We forget that they were the number 1 defense through the first 3 weeks before Dallas ran all over them, and we see them have some success with that heavy nickel personnel and quarters coverages before keeping offenses guessing on passing downs with all their pressure packages. Jeremy Chin is a very fun player who they understandably want to rotate down and beat his ball tracking missile, but then that other guy is in the deep post, and I'm sick of seeing Sean Chandler, Justin Burris, Miles Hotfield, and who we will have back there miss tackles as the last line of defense or allow deep shots between the numbers. That's a major weakness, I believe, which I don't see Xavier Woods totally make up for. I got the New Orleans Saints, and I put move tight end for them. It's kind of weird how we went into this offseason thinking of the Saints as this rebuilding team, and then after losing a couple of big names in free agency, Mickey Loomis does his magic again, and bring in other players to fill those key roles. While the base of the roster is still rock solid, I made my thoughts on the way that they operated the draft, known in the NFC South draft breakdown, which you can check out here on my YouTube channel. But for this year, they acquired guys to fill out the lineup as immediate starters. They bring Jameis Winston, signed 2 local stars in Tyrann Mathieu and Jarvis Landry, and all of a sudden they are right there in the running with those second-tier teams in the shallow NFC. I don't say that there's a huge need anywhere necessarily if you think that Jameis can be the guy for them. But if I had to choose an area that they haven't been able to maximize, it would be tight end. Troutman is my number 1 guy at the position in a questionable draft class 2 years ago, and I thought he could have a breakout year in 2021, which the rotating wheel of quarterbacks and multiple small injuries certainly limited him, but 27 catches for 263 yards and 2 touchdowns is certainly less than I expected. I still believe he can be a quality inline option for them, and have a major role because of what they want to do in terms of the running game and what he can do as a blocker. But I think another guy who they can move around the formation and make more of an integral piece of the passing game as a big body pass catcher other than Michael Thomas, who does play plenty in the slot, would make some sense for them. And I'm talking about Taysom Hill here, who's going to be back to be more of a gimmick player for them. And then you have Nick Vannett, who's your natural talent free. Then you're looking at Jawan Johnson, JP Holtz, and Kalali Waring. None of those guys will excite anybody a whole lot, and fill that mold that I'm talking about here. Division, we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I'm looking for an edge rush specialist. Unlike a couple of other teams in that division, where my choices weren't super obvious, this one kind of jumped out to me right away. The answer status of tight end Rob Gronkowski certainly is a thing to consider here, but I'm working under the assumption that he'll be back, and they did draft a pretty complete Y type to fill up the room in the 4th round with Washington's Kate Otten. Their first 2 picks in the draft actually addressed direct losses on the offensive and defensive line. The rumors about taking Georgia safety Lewis Cine in the first actually made some sense here for me because of the loss of Jordan Whitehead, but they did bring back Logan Ryan, and Mike Edwards has been playing well for them when filling in. So instead I'm looking at an area that has been a major strength for them, and now there's a bit of a question mark here. Without Pierre-Paul, last year's 32nd overall pick Joe Tryon-Shoyinka will have to step into a more prominent role after playing half the defensive snaps as a rookie. I've had a major breakout campaign opposite of Jack Barrett, and with the recent signing of Hakeem Hicks along with Logan Hall as his inside-out threat and passing downs. However, I still believe there's room to upgrade beyond those two true outside linebackers that they have there as an additional piece to throw out there in passing situations, as you want to rotate guys through and maybe ask Tryon to spy the back like I did quite a bit last season and then chase those guys out to the sidelines. The only other roster that would fit that description, at least in terms of the spot that they'll play, Anthony Nelson, who's a rotational player on rundowns with more defensive end body type and can give him some solid snaps. Cam Gill, who only played 9% of snaps last season, and then 7th round pick Andre Anthony from LSU. Nelson should be in the field quite a bit, but somebody who can threaten tackles in the pass sets with speed up the field should be a consideration here for them. Bringing us to the fourth and final division for today, the NFC West, where once again with the letter A we're starting with the Arizona Cardinals, where I have them going with the outside cornerback. I was debating players on either side of the ball here for the Cardinals because they went heavy on edge defenders in the draft and added a couple of guys on the interior of the O-line late, who I believe can contribute for them. While DeAndre being suspended for the first 6 games is huge, they did pay a first-round pick for Marquise Brown, formerly of the Ravens, reuniting him with the disgruntled Kyler Murray to appease him with being able to throw to his favorite target from the Oklahoma days, and he can replace that with Christian Kirk at least, with inside-out flexibility, as long as he's allowed to play off the line of scrimmage and doesn't have to play for contact a whole lot. So instead I'm looking at the defensive side of the ball, where after the tragic death of Jeff Gladney, a former first-round pick for the Vikings who got in some legal trouble early and was ready for his redemption story, I have to focus on the football field. Byron Murphy has turned himself into an excellent player for Arizona and can play outside as well, but he's at his best in the slot, so assuming they want to keep him there, you're looking at a combination of Marco Wilson, who is a very talented yet super unrefined 4th-round pick from a year ago, who allowed just over 70% of passes against him to be completed for 6 touchdowns and no interceptions last year. Antonio Hamilton, a journeyman backup cornerback, who started 2 games out of necessity for the Cardinals last season and having started 2 other games in his prior 5 seasons. Breon Borders, who jumped in for 5 games in Tennessee back in 2020 as a similar type of guy, and then Christian Matthew, a 7th-round pick out of Valdosta State this year, who had some impressive testing numbers, but I didn't study and is a long shot to play any significant role as a rookie. So they may be best to pull down one of the safeties into the slot and kick Murphy back outside if they want to survive on the perimeter. But the preferred way should be to add another guy out there. Next up, the reigning champs, the Los Angeles Rams, and I'm looking at general O-line depth for them. I wouldn't quite say they brought the band back together, with Von Miller now in Buffalo and Odell Beckham Jr. still unsigned, while Andre Whitworth finally rode off into the sunset following a Super Bowl win, and they lost 2 other starters in right guard Austin Corbett and cornerback Darius Williams. They did, however, sign big-name free agents like wide receiver Allen Robinson and the suddenly released perennial All-Pro linebacker Bobby Wagner from the division rivals. You combine that with some of the depth that they added in the draft, and there's not much in the way of LA making another championship run in a weakened NFC conference. There are some young guys who'll need to step up on the defensive line and at that second outside cornerback spot, but if there's one unit that could really become an issue for them this season, it's the offensive line. Joe Noteboom did an admirable job stepping in for Whitworth in a few games last season, including a tough stage against Tampa Bay's edge rush specialist in the divisional rounds, and the only pick through the first 2 days of the draft is Wisconsin's Logan Bruss, who should step in right away at right guard and do a solid job. However, he have beyond that to carry on game days. Bobby Evans, who I kind of liked coming out in 2019, but has only played 35 offensive snaps since the end of his rookie season, other than the 1 emergency start that he was called up for last season. An undrafted free agent from last year, Larry Jackson, who had very underwhelming tape at Iowa for the physical dimensions that he brings. Another one from 2018, Coleman Shelton, who was a liability when called upon last year. And then 7th round pick from this year, and A.J. Curry from Michigan State, who at best should be the final man to carry on game days probably, I believe. So if they suffer any injuries to the starting 5, I'd be very worried with the current construction of the depth chart. Then we got the San Francisco 49ers, where I put on shade nose tackle, or you want to call it one technique, the guy who lines up shaded to the shoulder of the center. A very interesting team the 49ers had this season, I believe, because they were also close to getting to the Super Bowl, and nearly beat the Rams a third time in the NFC title game, but somehow they are not being talked about at all due to the uncertainty at quarterback, despite Jimmy Garoppolo being the piece that has held them back a few times before, and they invested major draft capital into the guy of the future in Trey Lance. They did lose Pro Bowl guard Larry Tomlinson and 3 starters on defense, with nose tackle DJ Jones, nickelback K'Waun Williams, and safety Jaquiski Tartt. However, with a couple of draft picks spent on the offensive line, and a second-round pick from last year in Aaron Banks expected to contribute, several young twitchy corners looking to earn a job, and Talanoa Hufanga being kind of a ball magnet for them at safety when brought in, and on special teams, they probably feel fine about all but one of those spots, which is the area that I'm also worried about, the interior of the defensive line. Jawan Kindler is coming back for them, who's so freakishly strong that you can probably get away with playing him in the A-gap for a penetrating role at least. They signed Hassan Ridgeway, who can be a solid rotational piece for them, but they don't have that guy in DJ Jones anymore, who can swallow up double teams and allow Fred Warner to run around freely for that extra split second to be able to decipher and get to the football in time. With how much they want to get into those NASCAR packages, and at times have 4 defensive ends on the field practically, we're not talking about a player who will be on the field for 70% of the snaps or anything like that, but as an early down contributor, and for specific matchups against offenses who want to use heavy personnel a lot, they should be looking for a guy like that, who's usually still available somewhere. And then the final team for today, the Seattle Seahawks. Mike linebacker here. This is the one the Hawks can really only blame themselves for. Sure, the depth chart at quarterback leaves things to be desired, with Geno Smith, Drew Lock, and Jacob Eason. They need one of the young guys to step up as that number 3 wide receiver, along with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And there's a couple of battles for those starting spots on defensive edges. But considering that they made the decision to trade Russell Wilson and enter a rebuild phase, all of those pale in comparison to the hole left in the middle of the defense with the release of 8-time All-Pro linebacker Bobby Wagner. Not wanting to pay his $20 million cap number in 2022 is understandable, but I still find it hard to believe that they couldn't find a trade partner for a player like this, even if he had his first down year in a while last season. Either way, assuming they want to keep Jordan Brooks on the weak side, where he has been a solid player for them, even if he hasn't quite lived up to the first-round capital that they invested into him, and if they don't make as much of a transition philosophically on defense, and still play with those actual 3 linebackers on the field. Free agent Uchenna Nwosu is more so a hybrid Sam who plays on the edge largely anyway, so it's not like you're going to really play 3 stack backers. The piece that is missing, I believe, is a middle linebacker who probably won't be able to carry number 3 receivers vertically, quite like B. Wags did for them, and enable this defense to work for such a long time. But a guy who can force cutbacks into the pursuit in the run game and pick up backs on option routes when needed. Cody Barton is currently slated for that role, but he's never played more than 16% of defensive snaps and would be better suited as a backup and special teams ace. While beyond that, you're looking at Nick Bellore, Ben Burkervin, and Joey Iyingbuniwe. I hope I pronounced it right. Very sorry, I've seen the name before, but not actually had to pronounce it. But that's going to do it for the NFC side of things. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, because why else would you really be here at this point otherwise? And feel free to share this with a couple of friends who might enjoy this kind of detailed NFL content. Once again, the link to my page hellofootballtalk.com can be found in the video description, where I post all my written breakdowns and link the YouTube stuff as well. And my social media outlets are also mentioned down below if you want to know whenever I post, random thoughts that I may have on topics around football, and just if you want to further support me. I will be back here 1 week from today for the AFC edition of the series. In the meantime, you can read my breakdown on the most improved position groups of the offseason on my page, or I'll also have a detailed run through of every single draft pick and the fit on the new roster for all 8 divisions in the NFL, with timestamps for each individual team if you want to look for your specific favorites. It's something you can listen to for hours if you want to get to know all 262 new members of the NFL, as well as dive into some of the roster building process. Hopefully that already popped up in the top right corner for you. Otherwise, I will see you back here next week. So until then, see you later. Peace!